Welcome students. Let's continue with the poem The Progress of Poesy by Thomas Gray. Before we move further to the text, let's have a recap of the stanzas that we have already done. The Progress of Poesy, a pendatic ode, is an allusion-packed description of different poets and poetic styles from the ancient Greeks to the Enlightenment. So there's a journey of poetry and the style of writing poetry right from the ancient Greeks to the Enlightenment. The title, structure, and the content of Gray's ode are closely tied to the ancient Greeks. As you know that even the title of this poem, The Progress of Poesy, a Pindaric ode. Pindar is a Greek poet, and this ode is closely associated to ancient Greeks. Even in the structure of his ode, Gray tries to tie his poetry to the legendary poets of the past by using difficult Pindaric form made famous by Greek poet Pindar. In the 9 stanzas of the poem, Gray praises the muses who inspired the poets of the past chronologically, beginning with ancient Greeks, moving to the Roman and Italian poets, and ending with English poets such as Dryden and Shakespeare. So students, in this poem, in the 9 stanzas, quite chronologically, a poet, that is Thomas Gray, he has given you the progress of poetry starting from the ancient Greeks, moving to Roman Italian poets, and ending with the English poets. He mentions great poets of England like Dryden and Shakespeare. Gray attempts to describe poesy as a single heritage inspired by universal human emotions and state that poetry is powerful, as evidenced by its presence in human communities across time and geography. So you see, in this Progress of Poetry, he does not associate poem with any geographical area. Rather, he says that poetry somewhere is inspired by universal human emotions, and it is not limited to any time or space, that is geography of any place. So this universality which he tries to give poetry through this poem is quite noteworthy. Now let's continue with the text. This is 1.3 stanza. In 1.1 and 1.2, students, you have seen that Thomas Gray talks about the source of poetry originating from Greece, and he talks about muses. In 1.2, he talks about the magic of poetry, and he gives 2 examples of a god of war and Jupiter, that what magic can poetry do in the nature of human beings. Now in this 1.3 stanza, he talks about poetry is attached to love, and through this he says, "Thee the voice, the dance obey." So somewhere music also is associated with poem, and love is associated with poetry. He gives example of cupids, and he says that "Thee the voice, the dance obey, tempered to thy warble lay, over Idalia's velvet green, the rosy crowned loves are seen." The rosy crowned loves, here is the reference to cupids, and he says that cupids, that is love god, they dance to the voice and music of poetry, and they are seen dancing on the Idalia's velvet green. Now Idalia is a place in Cyprus, and he says that on Cytherea's day. Now Cytherea is a day which is sacred to Venus, that is goddess of beauty. So this day, which is called as sacred, these loves, these cupids can be visualized dancing on the green areas over Idalias, and this also shows us that how poetry is associated with music, with love, and the effect of this music on cupids. With antic sports and blue-eyed pleasures, frisking light and frolic measures, now pursuing, now retreating, now in circling troops they meet, to brisk notes in cadence beating, glance their many twinkling feet. Now in this stanza, poet, that is Thomas Gray, he continues to give you a nice description of this dance of cupids, where you can see them frisking and jumping, and in a very merry-making manner they are dancing. With antique sports, he says that they get engaged on this special day, Saitriya's day. They get themselves engaged into strange sports and blue-eyed pleasures. Now here pleasures is personified. So there's a time of merrymaking, and in this time of dancing and merrymaking and playing, you can see these cupids frisking light in frolic measures in a very merrymaking condition, now pursuing, now retreating. Now these are just the movement of the dance steps. Sometimes they come forward and sometimes they go back. Now in circling troops they meet, and sometimes they make a circle and they dance to brisk notes in cadence breathing. So that is rhythm, and they keep on dancing briskly in a fast way according to the music which is over there. Glance their many twinkling feet, and here he draws our attention towards the shining feet of these cupids as they are dancing. Slow melting strains their queen's approach declare. So as the music becomes soft and slow and melodious, this music symbolizes or signifies that the queen, that is Venus, she is approaching. Wherever she turns, the graces homage pay. So this goddess of beauty, wherever she is going to turn, wherever she turns on this Saitriya's day, graces, they pay their homage. Now graces were the daughters of Zeus, and they are considered as sweet and gentle, who bring refinement to life. So wherever there is beauty, we understand as readers that beauty is always accompanied by sweetness and gentleness. With arms sublime that float upon the air, in gliding state she wins her easy way. Now this goddess of beauty, that is Venus, she is picturized as arms sublime. Her arms are aloft, and she's floating upon the air, and gliding state. So she is walking very gracefully, which is considered as, you can say, floating or gliding condition that attracts everyone. She wins her easy way. People get attracted because she is goddess of beauty, so she wins the attraction of people. Over her warm cheek and rising bosom, so these lines, they denote her youthfulness. The warm cheek and rising bosom move the bloom of young desire. So wherever there is goddess of beauty, the desires and purple light of love, this desire and love, they always accompany her. So this way, music is closely associated with music, or you can say poetry is closely associated with music, with beauty, with love, with desire. With this we come to this 2.1, that is the second part of the poem, because as you know that this poem is divided into 3 parts. We have finished the first part, and now we come to second, that is 2.1. Man's feeble race, what ills await? Labor and penury and racks of pain, disease and sorrow's weeping train, and death's sad refuge from storms of fate. The fond complaint my song disapprove, and justify the laws of Jove. Now here we find that somewhere Thomas Gray starts philosophizing life, and he says that human life is full of labor, penury, that is poverty. And he gives a list of those painful things that human life is associated with. The racks of pain, disease, sorrow that comes in a weeping train. That is, there are trains of sorrows, one after the another, that human beings face in their life. And death, sad refuge from storms of fate. And the last thing that human beings experience is death, and death is the very sad result from the storms of fate. The whole life a person keeps on facing the storms of fate, which consist of pain and sorrows and labor, a lot of hard work, and in the end human beings die. The font complained, my song disapprove. So there are people who are foolish people who disapprove my song, who don't agree to whatever I'm saying, and they think that my poetry is incorrect and justify the laws of Jove. But he says that my poetry somewhere tries to justify the the divine effect of poetry, he wants to say that somewhere through his poem he wants to justify that whatever God does is right. See, has he given in vain the heavenly muse? Now, as you know that in this stanza he's talking about the justify the laws of Jove, that somewhere he's trying to say that whatever God does is right, or whatever God decides, it has a purpose in the background. And poetry also has a very divine effect on human life. He says that the poetry which is created, which is a God-given gift, it is not in vain that God has given this gift to human beings. He says that this heavenly muse, this divine effect of poetry, this divine gift of poetry, is not given uselessly to human beings by God. Night and all her sickly dews, her spectres van and birds of boding cry. So he says that both these things are created by God. It's night, or it's day. So after every night there is a day, and somewhere he says that day he is comparing to the divine effect of poetry. He says night in all her sickly dews, that when the night comes, there are dewdrops that accompany sickness. Her spectres van, and he also talks about that in the night time there are ghosts and birds of boding cry. So night also brings with it the ill-omened birds he gives to range the dreary sky. So this is also a way, an expression of God, that how this gift of night, it covers the dreary sky. The sky becomes dark, and there are dewdrops falling at night, and there are ghosts, and there are ill-omened birds, till down the eastern cliffs afar. But soon we see that when the night is over, on the eastern cliffs afar, on the mountain sides, on the eastern side, Hyperion, that is sun, march thy spy. Soon we can see that how sun marches, and glittering shafts of war, and the rays of sun, they have a war with the darkness, and the darkness gets dispelled away, and the day is covered with brightness. Same is the effect of poetry in human life, this divine effect, that when human beings are facing sufferings and sorrows and pains, but poetry brings a light, poetry brings happiness and beauty in human lives. We'll continue this poem in my next session. Thank you.